In episode 2 of the amazing digital circus, Pomni's adventure in the Candy Canyon Kingdom forces her to confront the surreal and bleak reality of life in the circus.
It's more dangerous than you think.
The Amazing Digital Circus is an online animated show about a colourful cast of characters stuck in a Technicolor digital prison known as the Circus.
It is strange.
The basic premise of episode 2 is that Pomni is taken on an adventure as part of her new life in the circus. Episode 2 also gives us our first hint at Pomni's character development. In this video, I want to discuss why I think the new character of Gummigoo, despite his ridiculous name, elevates episode 2 from an amusing 25 minutes to a compelling and intriguing little story. And it's interesting how confronting the artifice of her digital world prompted Pomni to be bold and fearless, but more on that later. First, let's go over the basic plot of the episode, then we can unpack the more intriguing storytelling elements and how all this changed Pomni. Episode 2 opens with Pomni having a nightmare about herself abstracting, which was depicted in episode 1, the pilot, as a complete physical and mental breakdown. In the nightmare, 3 other characters, Jax, Kane and Ragatha, watch Pomni's breakdown and dissolution with detached amusement. When Pomni wakes up, Ragatha is at her door, asking her if she's okay and saying there's no hard feelings for the time Pomni abandoned her. It comes across as possibly passive-aggressive, which is probably why Pomni doesn't look reassured or put at ease. Next thing, Kane sends them on an adventure to the Candy Canyon Kingdom. When Ragatha tries to get Pomni excited about the adventure, Pomni's only response is, "You don't have to hype me up, I'm not a child." Soon after, we're introduced to a trio of gummy crocodiles who want to get the syrup they've stolen back to their leader's mother. Our heroes begin pursuit of the gummy crocs, and after a series of moderately violent animated shenanigans, the croc's truck crashes into a digital abyss with the croc leader and Pomni on board. It's not just a digital abyss, however, it's also a digital archive with the design templates for the croc leader and the other key characters associated with his home. The templates are blatant evidence that the Candy Canyon Kingdom is just a digital creation. The croc leader's mother, however, isn't among the design templates. This catapults the poor croc into an existential crisis as he realizes that his life is fake. This is the part of the episode that I particularly want to focus on today. When Pomni's initial attempts to escape the abyss come to nothing, she sees the croc doesn't seem to care about getting out. When she asks if he's okay, he points out, "I'm nothing. My life, my memories, my friends, it's all fake." Pomni tries to be empathetic, arguing that feeling like you're nothing is kinda normal. She goes so far as to offer him a place in her new home, the circus. When he presses her on why she even cares, she states, "I guess I just don't want you to feel like you're nothing. I don't want anybody to feel like that." After a bit of back and forth, they agree on the new plan, and Pomni's friend introduces himself as Gummigoo, which Pomni jokes is just about as ridiculous as her name. Pomni and Gummigoo escape after Pomni figures out how to make the truck fly out of the abyss somehow. Then she reunites with the others and they return to the circus with Gummigoo in tow. Gummigoo looks around and has only just noted that he could get used to the place when Kane finally realizes he's there. With a snap of his fingers, Kane erases Gummigoo from existence. Pomni is, understandably, absolutely horrified. The episode appropriately ends with a funeral, but it's not a funeral for Gummigoo. It's a funeral for Kofmo, the character who indirectly caused Pomni's nightmare when he abstracted in the first episode. At the funeral, Pomni sees the genuine sadness of the other characters as they honor the memory of Kofmo. This contrasts completely with the callous disregard she imagined from the other characters during her nightmare of herself abstracting, and she smiles. It's a clever way to bring the episode full circle, starting and ending with the horror of abstracting, but ending with valuable knowledge Pomni gained this episode. While she guessed Ragatha's friendliness and concern for her was fake, Ragatha isn't as fake as she seemed. Just as Pomni had real empathy for Gummigoo, she sees that Ragatha and at least some of the other characters, Gangle, Kinga and Zubul, have real empathy and compassion too. But while the episode is emotionally satisfying for the way it comes full circle, equally important is the use of a strong emotional crisis at the central point of the story, what can be called an emotional midpoint. In his book The Emotional Craft of Fiction, Donald Mast describes the emotional midpoint as a second where the story is suspended, unable to go backward and about to plunge forward into the unknown. Episode 2 of the amazing digital circus represents this visually with the digital abyss. When Pomni and Gummigoo plunge into the abyss, surely the last thing either of them expects is to be exposed to the artifice of their world, a blatant display of character designs as physically present as they are. No wonder Pomni tries so hard to connect with Gummigoo when she sees him struggling, when he is emotionally shattered by the sight of himself as a mere digital design. Is that so different from her having only vague memories of her life before the circus? Is that so different from her seeing one of her fellow members of the circus, Korfmo, abstract as he all but dissolves into nothingness? Another writing trick Mast mentions in The Emotional Craft of Fiction is what he calls the emotional breakthrough or getting real. As Mast puts it, there's force and emotional effect in sweeping away artifice and exposing the raw reality that we usually try to ignore. Now, what Mast focuses on here is dialogue, breaking that vaunted writer's rule of show don't tell, but it applies equally well to the physical or digital reality that Pomni and Gummigoo see exposed for what it is. For Gummigoo, this is a complete punch in the gut that he never could have expected, but for Pomni, this is throwing the reality she's been trying to ignore straight in her face. The episode started with her nightmares about abstracting, and she spent her day trying to be aloof and detached. When she told Ragatha, "You don't have to hype me up, I'm not a child," it was more than a sarcastic one-liner. It was a way of asserting her emotional detachment. After all, hyping someone up is a way of getting them emotionally engaged, and the last thing Pomni wants is to feel emotionally engaged with her horrifying new digital life. But seeing Gummigoo's emotional pain, she sets aside her attempts at detachment and gets real. This leads us to the dialogue. When Pomni tells Gummigoo, "I guess I just don't want you to feel like you're nothing. I don't want anybody to feel like that." This is telling, not showing. It works because it signals a glimpse at a beginning for Pomni's character development, and it draws upon the theme set up at the episode's beginning. The fear of dissolving into nothingness that gave Pomni nightmares at the episode's beginning is made explicit, not as a confession of her own misery, but as a direct attempt to ease the suffering of someone who Pomni sees in similar emotional pain. As Mast puts it, getting real is what happens when a scene's subtext bursts through. Any sudden shift in tone, unexpected openness, or other call to genuineness and honesty can become electrifying and emotional. We don't show our true colors lightly. Telling the truth of things is risky. And so when Pomni gets honest and real, she is also getting vulnerable. Her moment of boldness with Gummigoo arguably gets her in a more fearless frame of mind, which pays off when she manages to fly their truck out of the abyss. Incidentally, let me know in the comments if you get how Pomni pulls that off. That perplexes me. Regardless, we see some nice symmetry where the midpoint is mirrored at the very end. Just as Gummigoo softens to Pomni when she gets raw and honest with him in the abyss, Pomni softens to Ragatha, Gangle, Kinga, and Zubul when she sees their raw emotional honesty at the funeral. At least for me, this all makes for a compelling episode that has me intrigued for what comes next on this weird show. The basic premise of episode 3 is that Pomni is thrown with Kinga into a hellish adventure, where Kinga's determination and flashes of sharp intellect take her by surprise. And it's interesting how Kinga has a moment of sadness that he uses to uplift Pomni, more on that later. Episode 3, The Mystery of Mildenhall Manor, opens with a demonstration to Pomni that she can stop breathing without dying, but it changes her face to blue, green, and other entertaining colors, and she still feels the agony of asphyxiation. Next thing, Kane whisks the team off to their next adventure, a haunted manor. As usual, Zubul manages to get out of it. This time, Kane whisks Zubul into an ad hoc therapist's office to get answers on why she keeps skipping his adventures. Zubul reveals that she doesn't hate Kane's adventures, she hates the digital body she's in. Kane reveals he is horrified by the thought that he's bad at designing adventures. However, what I want to focus on in this video is Pomni and Kinga. In the manor, a ghost appears so suddenly that the shock makes Pomni's eyes literally leap out of her head. All very cartoony, except they won't go back in. While Kinga tries to pop the eyes back in, Jax throws Gengel's comedy mask at a door and the mask gets swallowed because the door is some kind of cursed mouth thing. Kinga tries to grab the mask, but he gets swallowed up too and accidentally drags Pomni in with him. The pair fall into a basement and set off an ominous tape describing a terrifying monster. When the monster shows up, Pomni and Kinga escape down into a cellar with the corpse of the madman who made the tapes. Kinga shoots down 2 monsters, only to learn via one more creepy tape that he just killed off one of God's angels, and he and Pomni will now be sent straight to hell. 7 years of computer science for this, says Kinga. Is this a hint that he's one of the architects of the circus, or is it why he got sucked in? If you have a theory, let me know in the comments. Meanwhile, Ragatha and Gengel are having tea with a ghost. Jax isn't up to his usual shenanigans because they've tied him up, and so Ragatha and Gengel both get to enjoy an adventure for once. Down in hell, Pomni is panicking. There are white specks floating in the air, which are cursed souls that possess anyone who breathes them in, and they're guiding the stairs out. Pomni leaps for the stairs and gets possessed. Once Kinga has exorcised the souls using the whack her in the stomach approach, Pomni remains overwhelmed. Kinga reassures her, even apologizing for getting them into the whole mess. When Pomni points out he seems different, he responds, "Being surrounded by darkness always brings me back to a certain time." After his wife abstracted, Kinga was with her in the pillow fort, together in the dark. The darkness calmed her enough that he could touch her one last time before she was sent to Kane's cellar in the circus. Kinga's story is backed up by the visuals shown back when he was almost eaten by the first monster. As it opens its mouth to swallow him, he sees a multitude of eyes within the darkness of its maw, and he moves towards it as if he can reunite with his wife again. It's as though in this moment he is back in the memory of his last moment with his abstracted wife. I can't help but wonder if this monster is actually an abstracted being that escaped Kane's vault. We did see Kane momentarily lose control of the circus when he got upset during his chat with Zubul. If you have a theory about this, drop it in the comments. I suspect we may just be getting a glimpse into Kinga's confused mind here, but who knows. As for the wife he still misses, she was funny, creative, really into entomology, which got Kinga over his own hatred of bugs. Kinga acknowledges that life in the circus can feel pointless, but in his words, it's not. Not if you have people who care about you. Good memories can do a lot. Hold on to them. Turns out Pomni's breath-holding experiment at the episode's beginning was a Chekhov's gun. Kinga realizes that if they hold their breath, they can get past the cursed souls and to the stairs out. When Pomni and Kinga rejoin the others, Pomni thanks Ragatha for looking out for her earlier, acknowledging that she's been taking Ragatha's kindness for granted. Pomni is even impervious to Jax's teasing at the end. What could have been a traumatic experience was softened by Kinga's compassion and unexpected maturity in the cellar. Maturity here meaning that Kinga opened up to Pomni about his own experiences in the circus in a way that showed she wasn't alone, and let her see things from a more constructive perspective. In short, his sad story helped her. In the emotional craft of fiction, Donald Maas notes that in fiction, everyone loves a good cry. Sometimes, under the right conditions. The operative word here is good. What causes us to want to cry, to feel happy that we are sad? Part of his answer relates to death as a poignant way to create a highly emotional moment in a work of fiction. To make death poignant, make living beautiful. To make us miss characters who will die, make them the very best thing about being alive. as Mars points out, death is particularly painful when it leaves us with a sense of incompleteness, when there is a person we cared about who we never wanted to give up. And so the little details here, like how Kinga used to hate bugs until his entomologist wife made him fond of them, give the scene in the cellar more resonance. I do think we can use abstraction in this specific episode as a clear metaphor for death, and death's role in the narrative is only strengthened by the fact that, facing the monster and reminded of his lost wife, Kinga almost gave in to death himself, at least within the context of this adventure. It was only Pomni dragging him away at the last moment that stopped him being eaten during that first confrontation. We see how Kinga misses his wife and the joy that she brought to him, and so his moment with Pomni is more than a good pep talk. It shows us what Kinga has lost and how that motivates him to be kind when he can. We're already up to episode 3, and so this last episode was structured to advance character development and plot. In the writer's journey, Christopher Vogler describes how a story's various early tests, trials, or adventures can lead to the formation of a team, and to characters taking on new and unexpected roles. In episode 3, we don't just learn about Kinga's past, we see him shifting into a more mature role where he can be a protector and mentor to Pomni. And Kinga's moment of wisdom is even a catalyst for Pomni to strengthen her friendship with Ragatha at the end of the episode. Episode 7, Beach Episode, brings us full circle, returning to the plot of the very first episode of the amazing digital circus, but with a twist. In this video, I want to highlight the massive character development Pomni has undergone over the course of the show, with great payoff in episode 7. Also, I have some thoughts on the gut punch ending, but more on that later. The basic premise of episode 7 is a heist to steal the key of Kane's office, hack the circus's operating program, and escape. This is a more complex version of the key complication of episode 1, where Pomni wanted to leave by way of a bright red door marked exit. In episode 1, Pomni sees a supposed way out of the circus. She sees Ragatha attacked by an abstracted Kofmo, and Ragatha begins to glitch painfully. The selfless thing would be to stay and help, but Pomni's self-interest is front of mind in episode 1, and she dashes for the exit, which leads to more doors, none of which actually lead out of the circus, because it's all a fake scenario created by Kane to entertain the people in the circus. Episode 7 takes the same basic premise, but it's more complex, and Pomni's character development is huge. Let's start simple. In episode 7, Pomni and Ragatha stumble across a mannequin calling himself Abel, who claims to be a real human overlooked by Kane. Abel claims to be an original programmer of the circus, a co-worker of Kinga, and claims all the characters were once employees of a company called C&A, but are now in stasis pods. Because the stasis pods are run on the same program as the circus, once they hack the program, they should be able to eject themselves out into the real world. Sounds great, right? Just like a red door marked exit looked great when Pomni was panicking about being stuck in the circus in episode 1. Pomni has gone through enormous growth and change since her panicked escape attempt in episode 1. Of course, in episode 1 she was traumatized by finding out that all the characters trapped in the circus can eventually abstract just like Kofmo. Now let's quickly cover 2 more episodes to give more context to how Pomni has evolved and changed by episode 7. Episode 2 opens with Pomni having nightmares about abstracting, but when she meets Gummigoo in the abyss, she feels pity for him rather than self-pity. So this is her first shift from self-concern to concern for others in the circus, even if Gummigoo isn't quite real. She tells Gummigoo, "I guess I just don't want you to feel like you're nothing. I don't want anybody to feel like that." Just as Gummigoo softens to Pomni when she gets raw and honest with him in the abyss, Pomni softens to Ragatha, Gangle, Kinga, and Zubul when she sees their raw emotional honesty at Kofmo's funeral. I'd say the next huge shift for Pomni happened in episode 6. The basic premise of episode 6 is that Pomni teams up with Jax to fight the other characters in a new partnership that spirals into chaotic depths that she clearly never expected. Ironically, the one she was starting to feel close to, Jax, literally states, "You are my playthings, and I get joy out of making you suffer. I'm the one who causes pain for fun." Pomni becomes more critical of Jax's perspective here, understandably. She asks Jax if his behavior could have caused other characters to abstract. Jax launches into another verbal tirade against Pomni, and eventually Pomni snaps and physically attacks Jax. So episode 6 we could say was a low point from Pomni's perspective. She went from softening to most of the other characters in episode 2, to friendliness to Jax in episodes 5 and 6, to by episode 6's end, fury at Jax's seething hostility. Now attacking Jax didn't get her anywhere, but questioning him did. To put it another way, not questioning Jax's improbably rationalized explanations for his endless hostility led to Pomni getting both barrels of that hostility, and a long vicious showdown between Jax and Pomni at the end of episode 6. Where does that leave us in episode 7? Pomni learned. In episode 7, she hears Abel the Mannequin's slick explanation about a new heist to escape the circus. I'd argue this is more slick than Jax's childish rationalization that Ragatha being too nice is literally the same as being a manipulative and hostile person. Now in episode 7, we see Pomni and Ragatha reasoning through how to respond to Abel's plan in a logical and cooperative way. Also, Pomni makes sure every character is in on the escape, unlike in episode 1 when she tried to flee by herself. The escape plan is worth exploring, what have they got to lose? But rather than just getting swept up in the new plan, Pomni and Ragatha discuss their honest feelings about it, and agree they trust Kinga and want his input. Towards the episode's end, when they are in Kane's office, there are 2 buttons, blue to eject from the circus and red. Pomni hesitates at the blue button and wants Kinga's thoughts. She even suggests they vote before deciding what to do. Now at first glance, this can seem like a collapse in courage. She was at the final step of their plan and lost her nerve. But I'm sure there's something different at work. Pomni learned from her headlong rush to escape in episode 1, which only added to her trauma at being trapped in the circus. Here, she wants to make a reasoned decision, not a stupid one. She learned from her experiences in both episode 2 and episode 6. Both of which reinforced her knowledge of the others in the circus. She doesn't just trust everyone. For example, she doesn't let Jax take the lead the way he did in episode 6. She tries to get Kinga to take the lead because she's trying to be nuanced. Her experiences have led her to see him as the person most suited to make this decision because he has shown himself to be trustworthy and knowledgeable in the past. Pomni is focusing on the actions of the circus members rather than just believing what they say. And of course, Kinga is more trustworthy than the mannequin they only just met. The final reveal, even though it circles back to the plot of episode 1, is still a gut punch. To understand why, we can look at the book you might remember if you followed my channel for a while, The Emotional Craft of Fiction by Donald Maass. In his section on failure and defeat, Maass points out that worse than defeat itself, perhaps, is feeling helpless in defeat. And he poses a series of questions that writers can focus on in this regard. What depends on your protagonist succeeding? What is slipping out of reach? What does it feel like to let that go? In the end of episode 7, the characters are helpless, their hopes to escape dissipating like mist. But it's worse than the simple inability to escape that we saw in episode 1. As Jax points out, Kane lies a lot, and he's lied about how much power he has in the circus. He can make Jax vegan and change Ragatha's mind with a special sauce. So when he said the only thing he can't control in the circus is the circus members' minds, that was a lie. So what is slipping out of reach? The sense that the characters really can control their own destinies even in the limits of the circus. What's slipping out of reach is the possibility that Pomni and the others can protect themselves from the madness around them at all, and that is a gut punch of an ending. And yet I think this episode was weirdly hopeful. Pomni is learning from everything she's going through in the circus, and now she's smarter, more selfless, and more level-headed. The opening of episode 9 follows through on Kinga's ongoing mentor role. Kinga realizes that the characters were the result of brain scans of real humans. They are entirely digital entities after all. Kinga guides first Pomni, then all the other characters but Jax through reconstructing the damaged circus. After that, Kinga takes a back seat in the plot, and Jax finally abstracts, which is the main focus of this finale. While this was the longest episode, the plot was straightforward, and so I've kept this video short and to the point. Pomni has changed from someone whose goal was simply to escape the circus into someone, as she reveals to Kinga, who wants to uplift the others. Episode 9 gave us our final snapshot of a changed Pomni at the end of her tumultuous time in the circus. Let's start with the basics. Was the ending satisfying? Well, in her book Beginnings, Middles and Ends, Nancy Kress has the following thoughts on how to effectively end a story. A successful ending must be tied not only to the author's implicit promise and the forces dramatized in the middle, but also to the protagonist's nature. A test for your ending is this question: if my protagonist were a radically different person, would this story still end the same way? On that score, I think overall the Amazing Digital Circus ended well, but I do have my reservations, which I'll discuss at the end of this video. In the end, the character threads in the Amazing Digital Circus finale are relatively simple. Pomni gets a last confrontation with Jax, Ragatha and Pomni express to each other how much their friendship means, and Pomni solidifies her role as the unofficial leader of the circus. Because I think these three characters have the most complex and interesting relationships, at least in the last few episodes, they're the characters I'll focus on here, with Pomni as the primary protagonist and focus character. In fact, I'm using Jax and Ragatha here the way they are in the narrative, as foils that contrast in interesting ways to Pomni. Rather than going through the whole episode point by point, I want to focus narrowly on the journeys of these characters. Let's start with Jax. Here's my read on Jax's past. Jax develops a comfortable relationship with Ribbit and Cosmo. When he shares a deeply personal story with Ribbit, that's too vulnerable for him. After that, he has an uncomfortable feeling of vulnerability, of being too exposed with Ribbit. However, he still feels comfortable with Cosmo. Because of this, he focuses on his friendship with Cosmo and pushes Ribbit away. He becomes more callous after this, and is literally mean to Gangle from the very second she turns up, so we know that his attitude towards Gangle isn't because she did anything wrong. Ribbit was a very earnest character, but Jax couldn't bring himself to trust her, and eventually spiraling emotionally, she abstracted. And Jax's friend Ribbit's self collapsed, with Cosmo also abstracting after that. Jax's journey here makes him a good foil for Pomni because we can draw parallels with Pomni's initial mistrust of the very earnest Ragatha. Lucky for Pomni, her failed experiment teaming up with Jax leads her to realize that Ragatha's earnestness is sincere rather than completely phony or secretly devious. That brings us to the ups and downs of Ragatha and Pomni's relationship. The low point of Pomni's relationship with Ragatha is across episodes 5 and 6. In episode 5, Ragatha takes on board Pomni's advice that it's okay to be a jerk sometimes, and chews out Jax for being a jerk to everyone, then storms off, which only seems to make Pomni feel more sympathy to Jax. In episode 6, Kane divides the characters into pairs of partners for a shootout competition. Pomni wants to go with Ragatha, but Ragatha prefers Kinga, so Pomni ends up with Jax. After Jax blows up at Pomni in episode 6's end, in episode 7, Pomni and Ragatha patch things up. Learning about a potential escape from the circus, they align over a common goal. Rather than just getting swept up in Abel's enticing new plan, Pomni and Ragatha discuss their earnest feelings about it and agree they trust Kinga and want his input. This healthy cooperation is a sharp contrast to the dysfunctional and frankly embarrassing dynamic Pomni had with Jax in episode 6. Ragatha is a very different kind of foil to Pomni. Ragatha's earnest and painfully sincere nature makes her the perfect foil for the sarcastic and cynical Pomni and Jax. It's the character traits that Pomni shares with Jax, a tendency to be suspicious, a cynical eye towards things that strike her as off or absurd, that makes her evolution into a decent leader an interesting journey to watch. It's a stark contrast to the fate of Jax. I think the characters have always been the Amazing Digital Circus's strength, and the finale feels true to the people we've come to know over the course of the show. As for Pomni herself, episodes 7 and 8 see Pomni move from a sarcastic, exasperated and cynical circus member to the closest thing they have to a leader. In episode 8 in particular, we see her try to take the moral high ground. When Gangle interrupts Zubal's tirade that Jax stranded them in the circus, Pomni backs Gangle up, and Pomni and Gangle tell the others they may need to accept they're stuck in the circus and act as a team. Pomni appeals to a kind of moral optimism, pointing out they've all done things they aren't proud of, but arguing they can put that behind them and truly work together from now on. She carries this ethos with her in the last episode. When she confronts the abstracted Jax, instead of running the way she fled Kaufmo in the first episode, she hugs him. This transports her to a place where cartoony doors lead to strange moments in the circus, which is how she learns about Jax's grim past. However, the first moment she experiences when she opens the first door is to get throttled by Jax, who laughs at her panic and says it doesn't matter since she doesn't need air. This follows through on the complete lack of empathy he's shown at other points of the show, and it links to what I find least convincing about the finale. Jumping back to the quote from the writing book Beginnings, Middles and Ends, a point stressed in the book is that the forces dramatized in the middle should be tied up effectively at the end. And I think this is where I find the resolution a bit odd. Kane's gift to the characters at the very end includes basically a slideshow of the original humans the digital circus members are based on. All of them, including Jax, are living better lives and have improved from where they were before being uploaded into the circus. To me, this comes across as a Disney-esque happy ending that contrasts with the main story depicted in the circus. Pomni and Jax are similar enough that we can see how, if Jax adapted to his circumstances with an approach more like Pomni's, he could have had a happier ending, but we don't see any of that development or any of the choices made by the real humans, so their happy ending doesn't resonate as a satisfying resolution of all the complications introduced in this story. If you had the opposite reaction or a very different reaction, drop a comment. I'd be interested to see how other people felt about this. Also, if you watched it back in early June in the cinemas, what was that like, and did you feel differently about it upon a rewatch? Anyway, to me, we really see a consistent evolution of the circus members across the show. With Jax, the consistent failure to empathize with the others really hurts them and himself, which ultimately leads to his abstraction. With Pomni, her ability to learn from her failures allows her to step into a true leading role in the circus. Ragatha was a great foil in the sense she was so emotionally open and sincere that she was hurt easily, and learning to better detach from the behavior of the other characters helped her adjust. Possibly my favorite part of the show was what I think was a nuanced depiction of a healthy friendship developing between Ragatha and Pomni despite its rocky patches. Again, I feel like these interesting character arcs were undercut somewhat by the overly happy ending of the real world counterparts, where we see they rose above their trials without seeing how. But this is kind of a nitpick. Another nitpick is what happened to Bubble. Is Bubble dead? And why did Pomni hugging Jax lead her into a world with different aspects of his personality? Wouldn't Kinga have experienced something similar with Queenie? I think the strongest episodes of The Amazing Digital Circus had a strong theme and a tight plot around that theme. Episodes 2, 4, and 7 stood out to me as interesting explorations of character and theme. Identity crisis in episode 2 with a focus on Pomni, emotional coping in episode 4 with a focus on Gangle, and leaps of faith and trust versus mistrust in episode 7 focused on Pomni, Ragatha, and Jax. In my view, episode 9 doesn't rank as highly. Then again, this is an indie animation, and in my opinion, its high points are better than a lot of high-budget blockbuster shows. Pomni's struggles and missteps made her a great protagonist to follow throughout the animation's run. Overall, I finished this show feeling that the main characters were fleshed out well, and I appreciated the journey they went through. That's everything I wanted to discuss in this video. Like I said, I tried to keep it short and to the point. This channel is creeping up towards 500 subscribers, so if you could help me reach the big 500, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you to those of you who have subscribed already. Have a great week, embrace the weird, and thank you for watching.